The lantern light flickering through the barn slats caught Preston Ward's attention as he rode up to his property that November night in 1876, and his hand immediately went to the revolver at his hip, because nobody had any business being in his barn at this hour in Winslow, Arizona. He dismounted quietly, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt as he approached the weathered structure. The wind carried voices through the gaps in the wood, children's voices, hushed and frightened. Preston's grip on his weapon loosened slightly. Bandits did not bring children. He pushed open the barn door with caution, the hinges creaking loud enough to announce his presence. What he saw made him freeze in the doorway. A woman stood in the center of his barn, her arms spread wide as if to shield the 3 children huddled behind her in the hay. She was thin, almost gaunt, with auburn hair that had fallen loose from what must have once been a neat bun. Her dress was torn at the hem and covered in dust from travel. The children behind her could not have been more than 10 years old, the oldest, and the youngest looked barely 4. Their faces were dirty and streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear as they stared at him. The woman's chin lifted with defiance despite the trembling of her hands. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse and desperate. "We had nowhere else." Preston slowly holstered his gun and held up both hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I am not going to hurt you." The woman's shoulders sagged slightly, though she did not move from her protective stance. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 24 or 25, close to his own 28 years. Her eyes were a striking green, even red-rimmed and exhausted as they were. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since this afternoon," she whispered. "We saw the barn from the road. I know it was wrong to trespass, but the children needed rest and shelter. We have been walking for 3 days." Preston glanced at the children again. Now that his eyes had adjusted to the dim light, he could see they were in even worse shape than the woman. Their clothes hung on thin frames, and they looked at him with the hollow eyes of those who had known too much hardship. "You walked from where?" he asked. The woman hesitated, her jaw tightening. "Phoenix. We left Phoenix 3 days ago." Preston calculated the distance in his head. Phoenix was nearly 200 miles south. No one walked that distance in 3 days, especially not with small children. "You mean you have been traveling for longer than 3 days," he said. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "We had a wagon at first, and a horse. But the wheel broke outside of Flagstaff and the horse went lame. We had to leave them both." "What is your name?" Preston asked. "Teresa," she said after a moment. "Teresa Campbell. These are my sister's children, Emma James and little Sarah." "Where is your sister?" The tears Teresa had been holding back finally spilled over. "Dead. Fever took her 2 weeks ago. Their father died last year in a mining accident." Preston's heart clenched. He had seen plenty of tragedy in his 30 years, especially out here in the Arizona territory, but something about this woman and these orphan children struck him deep. "I am Preston Ward," he said. "This is my ranch. You are welcome to stay the night, and in the morning we can figure out what to do next." Teresa's eyes widened in surprise. "You are not going to send us away?" "Not tonight," he said firmly. "Come on up to the house. You all look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bed." "We cannot impose," Teresa started to say, but her protest was weak. "You already imposed by sleeping in my barn," Preston said, a hint of humor in his voice. "Might as well impose properly. Besides, those children need food and rest, and I imagine you do too." The tension finally left Teresa's body, and she looked like she might collapse. Preston stepped forward instinctively, catching her elbow to steady her. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through him, and from the way her eyes flew to his face, she had felt it too. "Thank you," she whispered. Preston gathered the youngest child, Sarah, into his arms. The little girl was too exhausted to protest, simply laying her head against his shoulder with a soft sigh. "Can the others walk?" he asked. Teresa nodded, taking the hands of Emma and James. "Come on, loves. This kind man is going to help us." They made their way across the yard to Preston's house, a modest structure he had built himself 5 years ago when he first claimed this land. It was nothing fancy, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and warm, and right now that was what mattered. Inside, Preston lit more lamps while Teresa and the children stood uncertainly in the main room. "The bedroom is through there," he said, pointing. "You and the girls can take it. The boy and I will make do out here." "We cannot take your bed," Teresa protested. "You can and you will," Preston said. "Now sit down while I get some food ready." He moved around his kitchen with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the stove and pulling out bread, cheese, and some leftover stew from supper. It was not much, but it was hot and filling. The children ate like they were starving, which they probably were. Teresa ate more slowly, watching him with cautious, evaluating eyes. "Why are you being so kind to us?" she asked quietly while the children were occupied with their food. Preston considered the question. "My mother used to say that kindness given freely comes back tenfold. Besides, turning away a woman and 3 children in need is not something I could live with." "Most men would," Teresa said bitterly. "Then I suppose I am not most men." After the meal, Preston helped get the children settled. They were asleep almost before their heads hit the pillows, exhausted beyond measure. Teresa tucked them in with gentle hands, her love for them evident in every gesture. Preston found himself watching her, noting the tenderness in her tired face, the strength in her thin shoulders. When she emerged from the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her, he had coffee waiting. She accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around it as if to draw warmth from the ceramic. "You should sleep too," Preston said. "I know. I just wanted to thank you properly first. What you have done for us tonight, taking us in without question, it means more than I can express." "You are welcome," Preston said simply. "In the morning we can talk about what comes next, but for tonight just rest." Teresa nodded, but she did not move toward the bedroom. Instead, she looked at him with those striking green eyes. "Can I ask what you do out here on this ranch?" "I raise cattle mostly, some horses. It is a small operation, just me running it, but it provides a living." "It must be lonely," she said softly. Preston shrugged, though her words struck closer to home than he wanted to admit. "I am used to it. Had a partner once, but he moved on to California 2 years back. Been on my own since then. By choice. Circumstance more than choice, I suppose. There are not many women out here willing to take on the life of a rancher's wife, and I have not had much time to go looking." A faint blush colored Teresa's pale cheeks, and she looked down at her coffee. "I should let you rest. Thank you again, Mr. Ward." "Preston," he corrected. "If you are going to be staying under my roof, we might as well use first names. Then you must call me Teresa." "Teresa," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. "Sleep well." He watched her disappear into the bedroom, then settled himself on the floor near the fire with a couple of blankets. Young James was already asleep on the sofa, curled up like a puppy. Preston lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of his suddenly full house, and wondering what the morning would bring. Dawn came earlier than Preston would have liked, but ranching did not allow for sleeping in. He rose quietly, careful not to wake James, and went outside to tend to the animals. The morning air was crisp and clean, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. As he worked, he found his thoughts drifting back to Teresa and the children. What was he going to do with them? The nearest town with a proper orphanage was Prescott, nearly 100 miles northwest. He could not imagine putting them on a stage after what they had already been through. Besides, something in him rebelled at the thought of sending them away, especially Teresa. He was still mulling over the problem when he returned to the house to find her up and moving around the kitchen. She had found his apron and tied it around her slim waist and was working on breakfast with the few ingredients she had found. "You did not have to do that," Preston said. She turned, startled, then offered a small smile. It transformed her face, chasing away some of the haunted look. "You fed us last night and gave us shelter. The least I can do is make breakfast." "The children still asleep, like the dead," she said, then winced at her own words. "I am sorry, that was thoughtless. No need to apologize. They have been through a lot. They need the rest." Teresa turned back to the stove, but Preston saw her shoulders tense. "I have been thinking about what we should do. I know we cannot stay here indefinitely. Perhaps if you could point us toward the nearest town with work available, I could find employment as a seamstress or a cook or a laundress. Something to support us." Preston poured himself coffee, considering his words carefully. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded without turning around. "Why did you leave Phoenix? Was it just because of your sister's death?" Teresa's hand stilled on the pan she was holding. When she spoke, her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "My sister's husband, before he died, had a brother. When my sister passed, he claimed the children as his wards. Said it was his right as their uncle." "That does not sound unreasonable," Preston said carefully. "It would not be if he were a good man, but he is not. He runs a saloon and keeps company with prostitutes and gamblers. He wanted the children for the small inheritance their father left, and he made it clear that once he had control of that money, the children would be farmed out to whoever would take them. He had already arranged to send Emma to work in a laundry when she turns 12, James to the mines at 14. Preston's jaw tightened. "So you ran." "I took them in the middle of the night and we left. I had some money saved, enough for the wagon and supplies, but not enough to get us very far. I thought if we could make it to somewhere new, somewhere he would not think to look, I could find work and we could start over." She finally turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Instead, we ended up here at your mercy." "You are not at my mercy," Preston said firmly. "You are under my protection. There is a difference. I cannot ask you to involve yourself in our troubles. You are not asking, I am offering." Preston set down his coffee cup and stepped closer. "Teresa, I understand if you do not trust easily, especially after what you have been through. But I give you my word that as long as you need shelter, you have it here." "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Preston thought about all the glib answers he could give, but in the end he settled on the truth. "Because I want to. Because it is the right thing to do, and because maybe you are not meant to be strangers." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Teresa's eyes searched his face as if looking for deception and finding none. Finally, she nodded. "Then I accept your offer, at least until I can figure out a better plan. But I will earn my keep. I can cook and clean, and I know how to tend animals. You are a guest, not a servant." "I am a woman who pays her debts," Teresa said with quiet dignity. "Please let me help." Preston recognized the pride in her words and respected it. "All right. We will call it a partnership then. You help around the house and with the children, and I provide room and board." "A partnership," Teresa repeated, and this time her smile was genuine and warm. "I can agree to that." The children woke soon after, and the house filled with the sounds of their voices. Preston found himself enjoying the noise and chaos more than he would have expected. Little Sarah attached herself to his leg while he ate breakfast, staring up at him with solemn brown eyes. "Are you a real cowboy?" she asked. "I suppose I am," Preston said, charmed by her directness. You have a horse. Several. Would you like to see them after breakfast? Her face lit up with the first real joy he had seen from any of the children. Yes, please. Emma, the oldest at 10, was more reserved, watching Preston with the same evaluating gaze her aunt had. James, at 7, seemed torn between curiosity and suspicion. Preston did not push, simply let them adjust to his presence at their own pace. After breakfast, he made good on his promise and took them all out to see the horses. Teresa walked beside him, her hand resting lightly on Sarah's shoulder, while Emma and James trailed behind. That one is Ranger, Preston said, pointing to a big bay gelding. He is my main riding horse. And that paint mare is Bess. She is good with beginners if you ever want to learn to ride. Could we? James asked, his suspicion momentarily forgotten in his excitement. If your Aunt Teresa says it is all right. 3 pairs of eyes turned to Teresa pleadingly. She laughed, a sound that made Preston's chest warm. I suppose it would be all right as long as Mr. Ward, Preston, is there to supervise. I will teach you myself, Preston promised. He spent the rest of the morning showing the children around the ranch, pointing out the cattle in the far pasture, the chicken coop where they could collect eggs, the vegetable garden that had mostly died off with the coming winter but would need tending come spring. Teresa followed, asking intelligent questions and clearly memorizing everything he told her. By midday, the children were worn out from the excitement and went down for naps without protest. Preston and Teresa found themselves alone in the kitchen, working together to prepare lunch. It felt surprisingly natural, moving around each other in the small space, falling into an easy rhythm. They seem happier already, Teresa observed, kneading dough for bread. I have not seen Sarah smile like that since before her mother died. Children are resilient, Preston said. Give them safety and kindness and they bloom. You are very wise for a bachelor cowboy, Teresa teased gently. Preston felt heat creep up his neck. I had a good teacher. My mother raised me and my 3 sisters on her own after my father died. She taught us all about strength and resilience. You have sisters. Where are they now? Scattered. Mary married a merchant in Santa Fe. Elizabeth went to San Francisco with her husband, and Grace, the youngest, lives in Tucson with her family. You must miss them. I do, Preston admitted. But we write when we can and I visit when I am able. What about you? Do you have other family? Teresa's expression clouded. My parents died when I was 16. My sister was 19. We only had each other and she had already married by then. When she died, the children were all I had left. Then we are both orphans in a way, Preston said softly. I suppose we are. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Preston found himself studying Teresa when she was not looking, noticing the graceful way she moved despite her exhaustion, the determination in the set of her shoulders, the love in her eyes whenever she glanced toward the bedroom where the children slept. Can I ask you something? Teresa said, breaking into his thoughts. Of course. Are you not worried about what people will say? A single man with a single woman and 3 children living under his roof. The gossip alone could be damaging. Preston had considered this, of course. Small communities like the one around Winslow thrived on gossip, but he had also decided he did not much care. Let them talk. Anyone who knows me knows I am an honorable man, and anyone who does not know me well enough to believe that, well, their opinion does not matter much to me anyway. You make it sound simple. It is simple. You needed help. I could provide it. Everything else is just noise. Teresa set down the dough and turned to face him fully. You are a rare man, Preston Ward. So I have been told, he said, trying to lighten the suddenly intense moment. Though usually it is said with more exasperation than admiration. She laughed again, and Preston decided he could happily spend the rest of his life finding ways to make her laugh. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Teresa threw herself into helping around the ranch with fierce determination, proving herself to be as capable as she had claimed. She took over the cooking entirely, producing meals that were far better than anything Preston had managed on his own. She cleaned and organized and mended, transforming his bachelor quarters into something that felt like a real home. The children settled in with the remarkable adaptability of the young. Sarah appointed herself Preston's shadow, following him around the ranch and chattering constantly. Emma slowly began to relax, even smiling occasionally. James was the slowest to warm up, but Preston noticed him watching everything with keen interest, absorbing knowledge about ranching like a sponge. Preston taught them all to ride as promised, starting with gentle Bess. Sarah squealed with delight, Emma sat straight and proper, and James showed a natural aptitude that impressed Preston. Teresa watched from the fence, her expression soft with gratitude. One evening, after the children were in bed, Preston and Teresa sat on the porch together, enjoying the cool night air. It had become their routine, these quiet moments after the chaos of the day, sharing coffee and conversation under the stars. "I have been thinking," Teresa said, her hands wrapped around her cup, "about winter. It will be fully upon us soon, and I know ranching gets harder in the cold months." "It does," Preston agreed, wondering where she was going with this. "I want to help more. With the actual ranch work, I mean. I am stronger than I look, and I can learn." Preston studied her profile in the lamplight. She was stronger than she looked, he had no doubt about that. Any woman who could walk nearly 200 miles to protect 3 children had steel in her spine. "It is hard work," he warned. "I am not afraid of hard work." "All right then. Tomorrow I will start teaching you." She turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for staying." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to examine too closely. Teresa looked away first, back out at the star-filled sky. "It is beautiful here, harsh and wild but beautiful." "It is," Preston agreed, though he was not looking at the sky. As November gave way to December, Preston found himself growing increasingly aware of Teresa in ways that had nothing to do with her usefulness around the ranch. He noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the sound of her humming while she worked, the grace in her hands as she mended clothes or prepared food, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at the children. And sometimes he caught her watching him too, her gaze lingering on his face or hands before she would blush and look away. The first snow came in mid-December, dusting the brown landscape with white. The children were ecstatic, having never seen snow before. Preston helped them build a snowman while Teresa watched from the porch, laughing at their antics. "Aunt Teresa, come help," Sarah called. "Yes, come on," James added, his earlier reserve finally melting away entirely. Teresa hesitated, then set down her mending and joined them. Preston found himself in an impromptu snowball fight, all 5 of them laughing and shouting like children. When a snowball hit him square in the chest, he turned to see Teresa with her hand over her mouth, eyes dancing with mischief. "Did you just throw a snowball at me?" he asked in mock outrage. "I might have," she said, trying and failing to look innocent. Preston scooped up a handful of snow, advancing on her with deliberate slowness. Teresa squealed and tried to run, but her skirts hampered her. He caught her easily, spinning her around. For a moment they stood close, breathing hard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold and laughter, her eyes bright, snowflakes caught in her auburn hair. Preston became suddenly, intensely aware of how close she was, how his hands were on her waist, how her hands had landed on his chest. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by something deeper and more urgent. "Preston," Teresa whispered, and the way she said his name made his heart race. "Aunt Teresa, watch me." Sarah's voice broke the moment, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. That night, lying awake on his makeshift bed in the main room, Preston admitted to himself what he had been trying to deny for weeks. He was falling in love with Teresa Campbell. Maybe had been falling since the moment she stood defiant in his barn, protecting those children with nothing but courage and desperation. The question was what to do about it. Christmas approached, and Preston made a trip into town to purchase supplies and gifts for the children. Winslow was small, barely more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings, but he managed to find some simple toys and candy. He also purchased fabric, thinking Teresa might like to make herself a new dress. The shopkeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, gave him a knowing look as he wrapped the purchases. "Heard you have a woman and some young ones staying with you." "Here it comes," Preston thought. "I do." "That is good. A man needs a family. This country is too hard to face alone." Preston was surprised by the lack of censure. "Thank you. My wife and we were not married when we first started traveling west together," Mr. Henderson said conversationally. "Circumstances threw us together, much like you and your lady, I imagine. People talked, of course, but we did not let it bother us. Been married 42 years now." "Teresa is not my lady," Preston felt compelled to say, though the words felt wrong in his mouth. Mr. Henderson just smiled. "Not yet, perhaps. But a man does not buy dress fabric for a woman he does not have feelings for. Trust me, I know." Preston could not argue with that logic on Christmas morning. The children's delight in their simple gifts filled the house with joy. Teresa had somehow managed to bake cookies and a cake, creating a celebration out of nearly nothing. When Preston presented her with the fabric, she looked at him with such overwhelming gratitude that he almost pulled her into his arms right there. "You did not have to do this," she said softly, running her hands over the soft blue cloth. "I wanted to. You have done so much for all of us, making this house a home. You deserve something nice." "Thank you," she whispered, and the look in her eyes said everything words could not. After the children were asleep that night, Preston found Teresa sitting by the fire, the fabric spread across her lap. He sat down beside her, closer than he usually dared. "Teresa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You ever think about staying? Not just until spring or until you have a better plan, but really staying?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. "What are you asking, Preston?" He took a breath, knowing he was about to lay his heart bare. "I am asking if you might consider making this permanent. You and the children. I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a couple of months, but I cannot imagine this house without you in it anymore. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Preston," she breathed, and he saw tears forming in her eyes. "I am not asking for an answer right now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. I care about you, Teresa, more than I probably should after such a short time. But every day I care more, and I needed you to know." Teresa set aside the fabric with trembling hands and turned to face him fully. "Can I tell you something? Anything? When I ran from Phoenix, I was terrified, not just for the children, but for myself. I felt so alone, so lost. And then we found your barn, and you found us, and for the first time since my sister died, I felt like maybe everything would be all right. Not because you gave us shelter or food, though that was wonderful, but because you were kind. Because you saw us as people worth helping, not burdens to be endured." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm in his. "You made me feel safe, Preston, and somewhere along the way you made me feel something else too, something I was not sure I would ever feel again." "What?" Preston asked, hardly daring to breathe. Hope and happiness, and something that feels very much like love. Preston's heart soared. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Teresa Campbell, I would very much like to court you properly if you will allow it. She laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks now. I think we have been courting already, Preston Ward. We have just been too proper to call it that. Then let me be clear about my intentions. I want to marry you, Teresa. I want to give you and those children a real home, a real family. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will have you. I want all of that too. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. He tilted her chin up with gentle fingers and kissed her for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise. She sighed against his lips, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and hope and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Teresa rested her forehead against his. The children, she said. We should tell them together. Tomorrow, Preston agreed. Tonight, I just want to hold you. They sat by the fire for hours, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and planning and dreaming. They would marry in the spring, Teresa decided, giving her time to make a proper dress from the fabric he had given her. They would officially adopt the children, making them Wards in both name and truth. They would expand the ranch, build a bigger house as the family grew. Do you want more children? Teresa asked shyly. Of our own, I mean. I do, Preston said honestly. If you do. I always wanted a large family, she admitted. My sister and I used to talk about having ranches next to each other, filled with children running and playing together. Then we will fill this ranch with children, Preston promised. As many as you want. The next morning, they gathered the children together and explained that they were going to be a real family. Sarah immediately started calling Preston Uncle Preston, which made his throat tight with emotion. Emma and James were more reserved, but Preston could see the hope dawning in their eyes. Does this mean we can stay forever? James asked. It means this is your home now, Preston said firmly, for as long as you want it to be. And you are going to marry Aunt Teresa? Emma asked. I am, if she will still have me in the morning when she comes to her senses. Teresa swatted his arm playfully. I am perfectly sensible, thank you very much, and yes, we are getting married. The children cheered, and just like that, Preston went from a bachelor cowboy to the head of a family of 5. Winter settled in fully, blanketing the ranch in snow and cold. But inside the house, there was warmth and laughter and love. Preston taught James and Emma more about ranching, impressed by their willingness to learn and work hard. Teresa sewed her wedding dress by lamplight in the evenings, her face soft with contentment. Sarah continued to shadow Preston everywhere, chattering about everything and nothing. In late January, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Preston was out mending a fence when he saw the rider approaching, and something about the man's bearing put him on alert. He called for Teresa to take the children inside, then went to meet the visitor. The man was in his 40s, well-dressed but with a cruel set to his mouth. I am looking for Teresa Campbell and 3 children, he said without preamble. I was told they might be here. Preston's hand moved to his gun. Who is asking? Name is Marcus Campbell. I am the children's uncle, their legal guardian. I have been searching for them for months. So this was the man Teresa had run from. Preston studied him with cold eyes. The children are under my protection now. Your protection means nothing against the law. I have papers giving me guardianship. Now where is my sister-in-law? Teresa appeared on the porch, her face pale but determined. I am here, Marcus. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You have led me on quite a chase, Teresa. Did you really think you could steal my wards and get away with it?" "They are not property to be stolen," Teresa said, her voice shaking but strong. "They are children who deserve love and care, neither of which you were prepared to give them. What I do with them is none of your concern. You are not their mother." "No, but I will be their legal guardian," Preston interjected. "Teresa and I are getting married, and we will be adopting the children." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound. "You think a hasty marriage will protect you? I have the law on my side." "Actually, you do not," said a new voice. They all turned to see Mr. Henderson from the general store riding up with another man, this one wearing a sheriff's badge. "Sheriff Morrison," Preston said in greeting. "What brings you out here?" "Mr. Henderson here came to me with an interesting story about how you might be needing some legal help, so I did some digging into Mr. Marcus Campbell's claim to guardianship." Marcus's face reddened. "This is none of your business, Sheriff. It is when fraud is involved. Seems the documents you filed claiming guardianship were witnessed by men who do not actually exist, which makes them invalid." "That is a lie. I have the paperwork right here," Sheriff Morrison said calmly. "Along with statements from 3 people in Phoenix who testified that you threatened to harm the children if Teresa did not turn over their inheritance to you." Marcus's hand went to his gun, but Preston was faster, his own weapon drawn and pointed before Marcus could clear his holster. "I would not," Preston said quietly. The sheriff moved forward and disarmed Marcus efficiently. "You are under arrest for fraud and attempted extortion. I will be taking you back to Phoenix to face charges." Marcus struggled and cursed, but it was over. Within minutes, the sheriff had him bound and on his horse. Before they left, Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat to Preston and Teresa. "Congratulations on your upcoming marriage. Mr. Henderson here tells me you are good people. Those children are lucky to have you." As they watched Marcus Campbell ride away in custody, Teresa sagged against Preston, tears of relief streaming down her face. "It is really over," she whispered. "It is really over," Preston confirmed, holding her close. "You are safe now, all of you." The children came tumbling out of the house, having watched everything from the windows. They surrounded Preston and Teresa, all talking at once, relief and joy evident in their voices. That night, after the children were asleep, Preston and Teresa sat on the porch despite the cold. "How did Mr. Henderson know to go to the sheriff?" Teresa asked. "I might have mentioned your situation to him when I was in town at Christmas," Preston admitted. "I wanted to know what legal options we had. I did not know he would take it upon himself to investigate, but I am grateful he did." "So am I." Teresa leaned her head on his shoulder. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that we are still in that barn, desperate and afraid, and none of this kindness and love is real." Preston tilted her face up and kissed her gently. "It is real. I am real. This love is real, and come spring, you are going to be my wife." "I cannot wait," she murmured against his lips. February and March passed in a blur of preparation. Teresa finished her wedding dress, a beautiful creation in the blue fabric Preston had given her. Emma helped with the sewing, learning the skill quickly. Preston and James worked on building additional rooms onto the house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family properly. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Teresa proved to have a natural talent for animal husbandry, and several of the cows she tended gave birth to healthy calves. Preston taught her and the older children everything he knew about ranching, impressed by how quickly they learned. In early April, when the snow had melted and the first green shoots were appearing, Preston and Teresa were married in a simple ceremony in Winslow. Mr. Henderson and his wife served as witnesses, along with Sheriff Morrison, who had made the trip special for the occasion. The children stood up with them. Emma and Sarah in matching dresses Teresa had made, James in a new shirt and his first pair of real boots. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed his bride to the cheers of their small gathering. Looking into Teresa's shining eyes, he saw his whole future reflected back at him, bright and full of promise. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with neighbors Preston barely knew showing up to wish them well and welcome Teresa into the community. It seemed Mr. Henderson had been spreading the word about the brave woman and her children who had found refuge with the bachelor rancher, and the story had captured people's hearts. That night, their wedding night, Preston carried Teresa over the threshold of their home to the giggles of the children. After tucking the young ones into bed, Preston and Teresa finally had their first moments alone as husband and wife. "Are you happy?" Preston asked, holding her close in the bedroom that was now truly theirs. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Teresa said. "6 months ago, I was running scared with no idea where we would end up or if we would even survive. And now I have a husband, a home, and my children are safe and thriving. It feels like a miracle." "Not a miracle," Preston said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Just love, pure and simple love." They came together that night with tenderness and passion, building the physical bond to match the emotional one they had been forming for months. Preston was gentle with her, knowing she had never been with a man before, and she responded with an openness and trust that humbled him. Afterwards, lying in his arms, Teresa traced patterns on his chest with her fingers. "I love you, Preston Ward," she whispered. "I love you too, Teresa Ward," he replied, loving the sound of her new name. The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch prospered, the herd growing larger and healthier. The children thrived, growing taller and stronger, their laughter filling the house. Emma developed a talent for training horses. James showed promise as a cattleman, and Sarah appointed herself the ranch's official greeter, charming every visitor who came by. In late fall, Teresa told Preston she was expecting their first child together. He was overjoyed, spinning her around the kitchen until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. They told the children at dinner, and all three were excited at the prospect of a new baby. "Can it be a boy?" James asked. "I would like a brother." "Can it be a girl?" Sarah countered. "I want another sister." "We will love it whatever it is," Teresa said, smiling at their enthusiasm. The pregnancy progressed well, though Preston became increasingly protective as Teresa's belly grew. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. The children helped more around the house, determined to ease her burden. On a warm June evening in 1878, Teresa went into labor. Preston sent James riding for the midwife while he tried to keep calm and supportive. Emma, mature beyond her 12 years, helped get her aunt settled and comfortable. Sarah held Teresa's hand and told her stories to distract her from the pain. Hours later, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the house. Preston, who had been pacing the porch in nervous agitation, rushed inside to find Teresa exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. "We have a son," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. Preston approached slowly, almost afraid to believe it was real. He looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and absolutely perfect, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "Can we hold him?" Sarah asked from the doorway where all three children had gathered. "Of course," Teresa said. "Come meet your brother." They named him Peter after Preston's father. He was a good baby, quiet and content, and the whole family doted on him. Preston discovered that he loved being a father to an infant as much as he loved being a father to the older children. He would sit up with Peter at night when he fussed, walking the floor and singing old songs his mother had taught him. 2 years later, Teresa gave birth again, this time to twin girls they named Rose and Ruth. The house was now bursting at the seams with children, noise, and love. Preston built yet another addition, creating more bedrooms and a larger common space. Emma was 14 now and drew the eye of several young men in town, though Preston had to approve of anyone who came calling. James, at 11, was already a skilled ranch hand and Preston's right hand in running the operation. Sarah, at 8, had lost none of her chattiness, but had gained a nurturing streak that made her an excellent helper with the babies. The ranch had grown significantly, now one of the larger operations in the area. Preston and Teresa had worked hard, reinvesting profits and expanding carefully. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the workload, good men who Preston trusted. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next several years. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Preston and Teresa's love only deepened. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy they named Paul and a girl named Rebecca. By 1885, Emma was 21 and had married a fine young man who worked as a carpenter in Winslow. The wedding was a grand affair, with half the town attending. Preston walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the frightened 10-year-old who had hidden behind Teresa in his barn all those years ago. James, at 17, was running much of the ranch operation himself now, showing a business acumen that impressed everyone. He had grown into a tall, capable young man, and Preston was proud to work alongside him. Sarah, at 15, was being courted by the schoolteacher's son, a polite young man that Preston approved of. She still talked a mile a minute, but she had grown into a lovely young woman with her Aunt Teresa's kind heart. Peter, at 7, was showing signs of becoming a scholar, preferring books to cattle. The twins, Rose and Ruth, were 5 and already inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into adorable mischief together. Paul was 3, a rambunctious ball of energy, and baby Rebecca, just 1, was the darling of the entire family. One evening, after all the children were finally in bed, Preston and Teresa sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. Teresa's hair had some gray in it now, and Preston had lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he found her in his barn. "Can you believe it has been almost 9 years?" Teresa asked, leaning against him. "Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once," Preston said, wrapping his arm around her. "Do you ever regret it? The hard work, the chaos, the never-ending noise?" "Not for a single second," Teresa said firmly. "You gave me and the children a home when we had nothing. You gave us love and safety and a future. How could I ever regret that?" "I was the one who got lucky," Preston argued. "I was alone in this house, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You and those children brought light and laughter and purpose into my life." "Then we were both lucky," Teresa said, tilting her face up for a kiss. Preston obliged happily, still finding the same thrill in kissing his wife that he had felt that first Christmas so many years ago. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Preston asked. "In the barn when I found you, I said we had nowhere else," Teresa recalled. "You had nowhere else, and I had been waiting my whole life without knowing it, waiting for you. That is very romantic, Mr. Ward." "I am a romantic man, Mrs. Ward. You bring it out in me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the grass. "Preston," Teresa said softly. "Yes, thank you for everything. For taking us in that night, for loving us, for building this beautiful life with me. I know I do not say it enough, but you are the best man I have ever known, and I fall more in love with you every day." Preston felt emotion tighten his throat. After all these years, she could still move him to tears with her words. "Right back at you," he managed. "You are my heart, Teresa. You and our children. Everything good in my life comes from you." They held each other as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their chance meeting. Inside the house, their children slept safe and sound, surrounded by love. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Emma had her first child, making Preston and Teresa grandparents for the first time. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a talent for innovation and expansion. Sarah married her schoolteacher's son in a lovely ceremony. The younger children grew as well. Peter did indeed pursue scholarship, eventually going to study at a university back east before returning to practice law in Winslow. The twins, Rose and Ruth, remained inseparable and both became skilled seamstresses, opening a dress shop in town. Paul discovered a love of horses and began breeding them, creating a successful side business for the ranch. Rebecca, the baby, grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's determination and her father's kind heart. Through it all, Preston and Teresa remained the center of their growing family. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, mourned losses when Preston's sisters passed, welcomed new grandchildren as their children married and started families of their own. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, their children threw them a surprise party. The ranch house, which had been expanded multiple times over the years, was filled to bursting with children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. Preston looked around at the sea of faces, all of them there because of the love he and Teresa had built together, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech," someone called out and others took up the chant. Preston stood, pulling Teresa up beside him. "I am not much for speeches," he said, "but I will say this. 20 years ago I found 4 desperate people in my barn, a brave woman and 3 frightened children who had nowhere else to go. I thought I was giving them shelter for a night, maybe helping them get back on their feet. What I did not know was that they were giving me a gift far greater than I was giving them. They gave me a family. They gave me purpose. They gave me love beyond measure." He looked down at Teresa, seeing the tears glistening in her eyes. "My wife likes to thank me for taking them in that night, but the truth is they saved me. I was half alive before them, just going through the motions. Teresa and Emma and James and Sarah, they made me whole. They taught me what it means to really live, to really love." He raised his glass. "So here is to 20 years of the best life a man could ask for, and to 20 more if God is willing. To family, to love, and to taking chances on strangers in barns." Everyone laughed and cheered, raising their own glasses. Teresa wrapped her arms around Preston's waist, burying her face in his chest. He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. "I love you," she whispered, just for him. "I love you too," he whispered back. "Always and forever." As the party continued around them, Preston reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. If someone had told him 20 years ago that he would find his wife and children hiding in his barn, he would have thought them crazy. But life had a way of surprising you, of bringing you exactly what you needed when you least expected it. He thought about that November night in 1876, riding up to his barn and seeing the light flickering through the slats. How easily he could have handled that moment differently. He could have turned them away, sent them to the sheriff, refused to get involved. But something had stopped him, some instinct or divine intervention or just plain human decency. And from that one choice, this entire beautiful, chaotic, love-filled life had grown. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that only comes from being surrounded by people you love. Preston danced with Teresa, with his daughters, with his granddaughters, his feet aching but his heart full. When the last guests had finally left and the house was quiet again, Preston and Teresa prepared for bed in the room they had shared for 20 years. Teresa sat at her dressing table, brushing out her hair, now more gray than auburn. Preston watched her from the bed, thinking she had never looked more beautiful. "What are you looking at?" she asked, catching his eye in the mirror. "My wife, the mother of my children, the love of my life." She turned to face him, a soft smile on her face. "You are in a romantic mood tonight." "Can you blame me? 20 years with you and I am still not over the wonder of it." Teresa came to the bed, sliding under the covers beside him. Preston pulled her close, fitting her body against his the way they had done thousands of times before. "You think about it sometimes?" she asked. "What our lives would have been like if we had not found your barn that night?" "Sometimes," Preston admitted. "I think I would have continued on alone, probably eventually married someone practical and built a decent but unremarkable life. What about you?" "I do not like to think about it," Teresa said, shuddering slightly. "At best, we would have ended up in some other town struggling to survive. At worst, Marcus would have caught up with us and I would have lost the children. Either way, I would not have found you. I would not have known what it means to be truly, deeply loved. But you did find me, or I found you, and we built this life together." "We did," Teresa agreed, "and I would not change a single thing about it." They lay in comfortable silence, their breathing synchronizing the way it always did. Preston was nearly asleep when Teresa spoke again. "Preston, do you think we made a difference? In this world, I mean, do you think our lives mattered?" Preston opened his eyes, considering the question seriously. "I think we raised 7 good children who are going out into the world and making it better. I think we built a ranch that provides employment and livelihood for families. I think we created a home filled with love that has touched everyone who entered it. So yes, I think we made a difference." "I think so too," Teresa said, her voice drowsy now. "I think we did good, you and I." "We did very good," Preston agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Now sleep, my love. We have grandchildren coming for breakfast in the morning, remember?" Teresa laughed softly. "How could I forget? Sarah is bringing all 4 of hers. And Emma is bringing her 3. And James might bring his 2 if his wife is feeling up to it. So only possibly 9 grandchildren for breakfast. Easy." They both laughed, and then Teresa's breathing evened out into sleep. Preston held her, thinking about all the breakfasts they had shared over the years, from that first awkward morning when she had tried to cook for him to prove her worth, to now, when they would be surrounded by the fruits of their love. He thought about the legacy they were building, not just in land and cattle, but in the people they had raised and the love they had shared. Emma was teaching her children the same values of hard work and kindness she had learned from Preston and Teresa. James was running the ranch with integrity and fairness. Sarah was creating a warm, loving home for her own family. And the younger children were all following their own paths, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and supported. It was more than Preston had ever dreamed of having, this big, noisy, complicated, beautiful family. And it had all started with 3 simple words whispered in desperation in a dusty barn. We had nowhere else, but they had found somewhere. They had found home. They had found each other. And in finding each other, they had found everything. Preston closed his eyes, holding his wife close, and drifted off to sleep with a smile on his face. Outside, the Arizona night was cool and clear, stars brilliant in the vast sky. The cattle were settled, the horses quiet in their stalls. The land that Preston had worked so hard to tame and cultivate stretched out in all directions, a testament to what could be built with determination and love. And in the morning, there would be grandchildren and laughter and the chaos of family. There would be work to be done and problems to solve and the million small joys that made up a life well lived. But for now, there was just this moment. A man and his wife, together in the darkness, surrounded by the sleeping presence of their family, wrapped in love and contentment and the deep satisfaction of a life fully lived. The years rolled on, as years do, bringing changes both joyful and sorrowful. Preston's hair went white, and Teresa's face gained more lines, but their love remained as strong as ever. They celebrated 50th birthdays for their older children, watched their grandchildren grow into adulthood and start families of their own, making them great-grandparents. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, though Preston still rode out most days to check on things and offer advice. He could not imagine a life without the work he loved, without the land he had poured so much of himself into. On quiet evenings, he and Teresa would still sit on their porch, sometimes joined by their children and grandchildren, sometimes alone. They would talk about the old days, remembering funny stories and tender moments, marveling at how quickly time had passed. "Do you remember when Sarah fell in the horse trough?" Teresa would say, and they would both laugh. "You remember when the twins convinced Peter that the chickens could talk, and he spent a whole afternoon trying to have a conversation with them?" Preston would counter. "Do you remember our first kiss?" Teresa would ask softly. "Like it was yesterday," Preston would reply, and it was true. Some memories never faded, no matter how many years passed. In the spring of 1911, Preston and Teresa celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary with a small family dinner. Preston was 63 now, Teresa 60. They had 14 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful in Arizona, a legacy that would continue for generations. That night, lying in bed, Teresa turned to Preston with a serious expression. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. If I go first, do not shut yourself away. Stay involved with the family, with the ranch, with life. I could not bear to think of you alone and lonely." "Teresa, what brings this on?" "Nothing specific. I have just been thinking about how blessed we have been and how nothing lasts forever. I want to make sure you will be all right, whatever happens." Preston pulled her close, his heart aching at the thought of losing her. "I promise, but you have to promise me the same thing." "I promise," she said. "Though honestly, I cannot imagine this world without you in it." "Then we will just have to stick around together for a good long while yet," Preston said firmly. "I am not ready to leave you or this life we have built." "Agreed," Teresa said, and they sealed the promise with a kiss that still held all the passion and tenderness of their younger days. They did stick around together for nearly a decade more. They saw their great-grandchildren grow, celebrated their 40th anniversary, and even their 42nd. They grew old together with grace and humor, supporting each other through the aches and pains of aging, celebrating the joys that kept coming. In the fall of 1919, Teresa fell ill with pneumonia. Preston stayed by her bedside day and night, holding her hand and telling her stories of their life together. The house filled with family, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all gathering to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family. On a cool October evening, with Preston holding her hand and their oldest children gathered around, Teresa Ward passed peacefully from this life to the next. Her last words were, "I love you," whispered to Preston, who whispered them back through his tears. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona. Teresa had touched so many lives over the years through her kindness and generosity and the love she had shown to everyone she met. Preston stood at her graveside, surrounded by his family, and said goodbye to his beloved wife of 42 years. In the days and weeks that followed, Preston kept his promise. He did not shut himself away. He continued to be involved with the ranch, though James had taken over completely now. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother and keeping her memory alive. But the nights were lonely. The house that had once been so full of life and noise felt empty now, even when family was visiting. Preston would sit on the porch where he and Teresa had spent so many evenings, and he could almost feel her presence beside him. One evening, Emma came to visit and found him there, staring out at the sunset. She sat down beside him, taking his hand. "Are you all right, Dad?" she asked gently. Preston squeezed her hand. "I miss her," he said simply. "Every moment of every day I miss her. I know we all do. But I am grateful too," Preston continued. "Grateful for every year, every day, every moment we had together. Some people search their whole lives and never find what your mother and I had. I was blessed beyond measure to have her for as long as I did." "She felt the same way about you," Emma said. "She told me once that finding you was like finding the other half of her soul. That she had been incomplete before you and whole after." Preston's eyes filled with tears. "She said that many times. You two had something special, Dad, something rare and beautiful. We were all lucky to witness it and learn from it." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the land Preston and Teresa had built their life on. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. The house behind them was solid and strong, filled with evidence of the family they had created together. Preston lived for 3 more years, remaining active and involved until the end. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1922, just a few months after his 74th birthday. His children laid him to rest beside Teresa, their headstones side by side just as they had been in life. The ranch continued under James's stewardship, and then his sons and his grandsons after that. The Ward family remained a fixture in Winslow, Arizona, for generations. All of them descended from the brave woman and 3 frightened children who had taken shelter in a barn one desperate November night, and the cowboy who had taken them in. And though Preston and Teresa were gone, their love story lived on. It was told and retold at family gatherings, passed down from generation to generation. It became the standard by which all the Ward family measured their own relationships, a shining example of what love could be when built on kindness, trust, and unwavering commitment. The barn where it all started eventually fell down, replaced by modern structures. But the land remained, and the house still stood, expanded and updated, but fundamentally the same home that Preston and Teresa had filled with love and laughter. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Arizona plains, some family members swore they could hear echoes of the past, children laughing, a woman humming as she worked, a man's deep voice telling stories. The sounds of a life well lived, a love well loved, a family well raised, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle or the wealth accumulated. What mattered was the love shared, the lives touched, the legacy of kindness and courage and hope passed down through the generations. Preston and Teresa Ward had started with nothing but each other and 3 borrowed children. They had built an empire of love that would endure long after they were gone, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring hearts they would never know. And it had all begun with 3 whispered words in a darkened barn, words that changed everything, words that started it all. We had nowhere else. But they had found somewhere. They had found everything. They had found each other, and that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything.